When people are in a position where others know them, others have expectations of them that they don't know. So you think about your normal relationships. You share something of yourself, someone shares something of you, and you know each other. When you're in a position of leadership, that arrow goes one way. And with that arrow goes a lot of expectations and assumptions that people make about you when you're in a leadership position that you don't get to acknowledge or even respond to because you don't know it's being done.
Welcome to the Shepherd's Podcast, a podcast by pastors for pastors, designed to be a communal space where relationships and resources bring refreshing and renewal to those who shepherd and lead congregations. Connect with us and check out more episodes and resources at theshepherdsnetwork.com.
Welcome again to the Shepherd's Podcast, and I am really excited today to be talking to a very dear person who has made an impact in my life, taught me many things that has helped me to maintain my mental health and also help other people who are struggling. And her name is Dr. Kathleen Kelly, and Dr. Kathleen Kelly is the founder of the Sorona Counseling Center in near Orlando, Florida, in Winter Garden, I believe. Is that correct?
Winter Springs.
Winter Springs. And Dr. Kelly works in an environment where she does intensives. She'll bring individuals in for 2, 3, or 4 day, sometimes 5-day intensives, and works for an extended period of time, helping people work through the issues where they're stuck in life. And is a specialist in treating trauma, addictions, and life-controlling issues. So, Dr. Kelly, welcome today. It is great to have you with us on the Shepherd's Podcast.
Thank you for having me. I am so glad to be here.
Dr. Kelly, we became acquainted several years ago. There were some people some leaders actually, in our congregation who needed some help. They had some family members who had heard about your work. They ended up going down, and it was life-changing for them. They experienced real insight, breakthrough, and came back and faced life differently. Went from chronic depression and addictive uh, struggles to a place where they felt in control of their lives. And so I'd heard about your work from others who had experienced it. And I was able, a couple of maybe 2 years later, to actually be in Orlando. And you and I sat down and we spent some time together. And I just asked you a lot of questions and was fascinated by your knowledge, your experience. And you taught me some amazing things about how the mind works and how important it is for us to have mental health. So I want to thank you for your work and what you continue to do in the lives of people.
Thank you. Thank you.
That,
I love what I do.
let's go back and talk a little bit. Do you mind if I call you Kathleen?
No, please.
All right. So Kathleen, let's talk a little bit about your history. Uh, Tell the folks who are watching and listening a little bit about how you came into the field that you're in, your background, and what your interests are.
Oh, that'd be great. I'd be glad to share that. I actually came into the field of psychology and becoming a psychologist in a roundabout way, and when I was older. I went back to school around the age of 30. I was an equestrian horseback rider for many years, and I was sort of a big fish in a little pond, you'd say, and experienced a lot of I was a trainer, I was in a leadership position, had a lot of people pulling at me, and I collapsed, basically. Burnout in a big time way and didn't understand what was going on for me. I had depression, didn't understand that. So, in the process, being very fortunate to have good therapists and be able to have some help, I got very interested in how people tick and how to help others with this. So, I went back to school. And when I got out, I was fortunate to be exposed to a master clinician who taught me not just the neuroscience behind what's going on for us, but the art of working with human beings.
The art. So, what when you talk about the art, can you delve into that a bit?
When I first met, a lot of other therapists, you have people who have good technique, you have people who have good training, and then you have people who touch you and they speak to you from their heart and they speak to you as another human, not as an expert. And they keep an open mind, like a beginner's mind. And this master clinician, this mentor of mine, although he was Dr. Michael Lukens from South Florida, although he was a very talented and educated man, he always approached people with a curiosity, a beginner mind, and he followed where people were at, and he taught me that dance, that beautiful dance, always with compassion. And I learned a lot from that approach.
So while you were training under Dr. Lukens, you did a lot of work with trauma and addictions. Is that correct?
Yes, almost exclusively.
Almost exclusively. And what did you discover that was maybe unique or different in the approach?
The thing that was probably one of the biggest drivers for me in terms of how I work even now is recognizing that everyone's doing the best they can with what they have. And when you look at an ideal child and what we all might need, in an ideal circumstance, and we take things away and we look at what people do with what's left, then you can sort of see this process that we have of coming up with solutions for original problems that then become in of themselves problems like drinking or using drugs or porn or even withdrawing, becoming isolative. Anything that we do can almost become, it's an original solution, but then becomes a problem in of itself.
So we learn to cope with our pain. Is that what you're saying? And
Mhm.
when you say original solution, it's what we learn early that helps us to manage what is hurting us. Is that right?
Right. So, think about, we have needs for connection, we have needs for being safe, we have needs for belonging, we have needs for for mattering, for having our feelings, explained to us. And we don't always get that. People don't always get the ideal kind of childhood. And so we have to cope with those wounds. And those wounds just don't go away. Our needs are not optional. There's a difference between needs and wants. And so needs are not optional. So we are going to find some way to do that. And that's what I kind of learned how to, through Dr. Lukens and through my future work, to really understand how that initial vulnerability gets handled coping wise, and then how that coping sometimes really works not so well, and that sometimes it works great, sometimes not so well.
And in the process of learning how to cope differently, right? Um, Finding new ways to deal with whatever that pain might be.
Hmm. Yes, that's the big ticket item.
So in this community that we're talking to, we're dealing with people who are leaders of local churches.
Mhm.
So they're in leadership in some capacity, either as a senior pastor or as a support pastor or someone that's in the pastoral team, working with people day in and day out.
Mhm.
Our focus as ministers is to help people spiritually, to help them
Mhm.
connect with God and connect with themselves and live functional lives connecting in the earth, a life that matters. And the recent statistics that have come out, specifically since COVID, have been shocking. I might have mentioned to you earlier that Faith Life has done a survey of pastors across the board throughout the country, and 12% of pastors acknowledged having thoughts of committing suicide, taking their own lives,
Mhm.
just in the last year alone. 12%. And there's several other there's another percentage of folks that didn't chose not to respond to the question,
Mhm.
which is concerning. And
Mhm.
the level of pastors that are either quitting, considering quitting, if they're not wanting to take their lives, they, like, up to 50% of pastors are considering leaving their pastorate, going to some kind of a work environment that's less stressful. And I think that we need to recognize that the work that we do as leaders of local churches is a little bit of a unique kind of leadership. If you're the head of a company and your marriage doesn't work out and you get a divorce, well, you can remarry. divorce and remarry. It doesn't have any impact on your income. It doesn't have any impact on your immediate impact or visible impact on your leadership. It doesn't disqualify you from your job. Unfortunately, and good or bad, that's different when it comes to pastors. What we
Mhm.
do personally, how we behave, the moral standards that we're held to and that we should hold ourselves to are higher, and they're impactful for our leadership and for the
Mhm.
particular congregations we serve. And a combined issue is the fact that people who lead in local churches, specifically if they've led for a long time at a local church in a smaller community, or if they pastor larger churches, uh, there are lots of people in the community that know you that you don't know.
Mhm.
And so the sense of anonymity, that everyone has a
Mhm.
certain amount of anonymity when they're in public, that evaporates. And the
Mhm.
longer that you're leading in a church, the less anonymity that you enjoy. And so there are people who know you, who hold you to a standard because you're a Christian leader or a spiritual leader, and you get to the point where you feel almost like you have to be on all the time.
Mhm.
And people often misunderstand, misinterpret you because they see you communicating in the pulpit something that is, we consider the Word of God to be divinely true, but we don't. Nobody lives up to the perfection of God. We all fall short. So the stress of that over time is
Mhm.
significant. And so in this survey, it reveals that. It talks about the high level of stress, burnout, pastors that want to quit, the suicide statistic that I mentioned. And in many cases, I think the thing that's most troubling is the amount of pastors who express feeling isolated and alone. They don't have anybody else they can talk to because everybody that they know, they lead in some capacity. And that makes it really, really difficult. Can you speak to that a little bit as a psychologist?
Oh, absolutely. Those statistics are heart-rendering. Um, when people are in a position where others know them, others have expectations of them, they don't know. So you think about your normal relationships. You share something of yourself, someone shares something of you, and you know each other. When you're in a position of leadership, that arrow goes one way. And with that arrow goes a lot of expectations and assumptions that people make about you when you're in a leadership position that you don't get to acknowledge or even respond to because you don't know it's being done. On the other side, people are often, we find it very easy to hold people up on a pedestal. It's very comforting for us. This is one of the reasons why I think people look up to not just pastors, but celebrities or a professor at school or a teacher. People seem to be find a lot of comfort in looking up and seeing an ideal to want to follow. And so when we look at the way we're built, and I'll talk about this if you want as we go, we're built to have three different types of needs and wants inside of us. And the very first one is a child need. And that child looks up to mom and dad. And if that's a good thing, and they can model and look up and see that person as omnipotent. And the other thing that happens as a child is the child's relationship is a one-way street. And that is that the gives to the child, and the child is mostly on the receiving end. That doesn't mean parents don't get a lot of joy, but the child is really getting their needs met from their parent. And so when we are looking up at someone in a position that's moving us, that's inspiring us, that's touching us deeply, that can turn on that childlike nature of wanting to see that person as omnipotent and all good because it's comforting and it's inspirational. The other thing that about that, however, is that when that person, as mom and dad, might fail, the consequences can be devastating. And when we are an adult walking around, we don't necessarily know. This is one of the things you loved about talking with me is that I sort of take a lot of that neuroscience and I hang it on the scaffolding of that child mindset, that
Yeah.
teenage mindset. and an adult mindset. So we can be walking around minding our own business and be catapulted back into some of these earlier mindsets. And this is never so true as when you have been disappointed by a figure that you have held up as someone that's aspirational.
So you mentioned this, and I think we should just jump into this because I found this to be incredibly powerful. Uh, the child mindset, the teen mindset, and the adult mindset. Can you go into that a little bit, Dr. Kelly? A little bit about how those mindsets develop and how they stay with us through life, and sometimes uh, hijack our life.
Hmm. Often. Yeah. Um, the the brain never forgets what it's like to be a child nor a teenager. And our brain is a remarkable, the brain, I talk about the brain as if it's all by itself. It's connected to the mind, the body, obviously. But the concept of the early stages. I like to divide that between 0 and 10, in terms of what happens when you're born this helpless little goober and you become in 10 years a fifth grader. So there's a lot of things going on. First of everything, you're learning your first sense of self, your first sense of others. Are they dependable or not? Are they there for you? Your sense of the bigger world, is it safe or not? This is all going on in those first 10 years. And what the brain does is it wants to help us maximize how to function and get along and live in the moment. So it predicts. Think about once you learn to walk, how funny that is. You're falling down and getting back up, but then you walk automatically. Well, people don't understand that we do emotional patterns the same way. So the brain, our conscious channel is not very large. So a lot of stuff goes automatic. So in childhood, early beliefs about whether someone's there for you, can be trusting or not, those things go for good or for bad automatic. So if you ever meet people who sort of meet everyone with a hello, I love you, because they've been well loved in childhood, they didn't have any reason to have any suspicion that someone didn't have their best interests at heart. They meet people with an open heart. They're no different, in terms of what the brain is doing than someone who meets people with, I don't like you until you prove that you're trustworthy. And that's just the brain predicting early experiences. Now that doesn't mean later on you can have those experiences and brain will adapt to that too, but much of the time that's going down early childhood. And then the teen years are where we learn to develop those coping and defensive ways of managing the unique vulnerabilities of our childhood.
So the child has these vulnerabilities and really doesn't have the power to protect itself.
Right.
So the teen mindset develops after fifth grade, in fifth grade, around that time.
Again, this is very variable, but if we want to sort of arbitrarily kind of look at a line, we tend to look at 11, 10, 11. It's really when the brain is starting to move into its adolescence. As puberty starts to hit, the brain literally changes. So the adolescent brain is not just a child brain more mature. It actually has a different structure and a different focus, motivations.
So what part of the brain is developing as a child, and then what part of the brain comes online in the teenage years?
So as you think about a child, when you can play kind of tricks with a child, they might not be connected to the idea of physics. So they can think that they can fly or their stuffed animal comes to life, right? Then we develop concrete operations. We start to recognize more what the reality is, right? So we then develop, you can probably look at the development of morals. It's really fun to talk about how little kids are black and white, right or wrong. And, then as we get more mature in our development, we can sort of see shades of gray in some things. So what we really look at with what comes online with the teenage brain is just cognitively, the brain matures enough to start to have some capacity to think in ways that we can defend ourselves. So sticks and stones will break my bones, but names will never hurt me. A child doesn't understand that,
Okay,
right? But a teenager, at some point, the teenager is able to mask, right? Like I can pretend I'm not mad.
right.
I can pretend I'm happy. I can actually put my needs aside to take care of my mom who's drinking too much, and I gotta make sure she's paying the bills, right? So I'm gonna shove down what I need. A little 3-year-old, a 5-year-old can't do that very well.
Okay.
Does that make sense?
It does. One of the things that you and I discussed in our meeting together was how the teen actually defends the child because the child
Yes.
mindset, as you pointed out, is with us our whole life. There's that
Yep,
part of
yep,
our thinking that's very kind of simple and innocent and
yep,
vulnerable. But the
yep,
teen now is learning the teen mindset. How do we protect those vulnerabilities?
yep,
Did I say that right?
absolutely. And what makes us vulnerable is unique. So one of the things I do, yeah, as you, I've talked about this with you, is I will do someone's timeline. So I go through those first 10 years in detail, and then I go through the second 10 years in detail, because I want to know what's stored in the brain. So not everyone's vulnerable to the same thing. So some people are very vulnerable to shame. Other people are not vulnerable to shame. They can feel it. It doesn't mean they like it, but they don't defend against it.
I see.
All right. Some people, they're in their families, they do anger very well. Anger does not mean the loss of love. Other families, anger is catastrophic. So their teenager will never be angry. Does that make sense?
Yeah. What about people that use anger as a defense mechanism to defend their vulnerabilities?
Yeah, very, very good question. So most of us do this. So there are two emotions that are valid to they're just regular emotions, but they're also what we call defensive emotions, and that is anger. In other words, we will use anger rather than feeling sad or guilty or shame. We actually will feel anger rather than feel those. It protects us. The other feeling we have is fear. So we can be truly terrified, but we also can be fearful of our feelings. I'm afraid to feel sad. If I get sad, I'll never get out. I'm afraid to feel shame. I'm afraid I'm unfamiliar with that feeling. It's overwhelming to my system.
So that's where uh, what are some of the behaviors that can be associated with that when you're not wanting to feel what you're really feeling as a teenager, or that teenage mindset's trying to defend that? I think you described it to me as a scared little kid.
Yeah,
So the teenager comes on, and you think of a teenager, you think of someone that's sometimes rebellious, that is emotional, that is can be manipulative, that uh, is tends to run towards drinking and all kinds of things in excess. Right, all of those behaviors, they can be rooted in those teenage characteristics, can be rooted in this idea that I have to defend my vulnerabilities and the vulnerabilities of my child. Did I say that correctly?
perfectly. What's important to it's often how addictions develop. What's important to note about this is that this is not a cognitive decision. So people will say, "Why did I choose these defenses? Why did I drink? Or why do I get angry? Or why do I stonewall and get quiet? Why can't I just tell my spouse what I'm feeling, right? Why is it so hard for me to speak up?" The nervous system chooses this stuff. So when you're 10 and 11, 12, you're not lying in bed at night, for the most part, saying, "I'm going to pick up this as a defense." We use what works. So if it works, this is how OCD sort of happens a little bit. Is you sort of adjust something, or you're tense, you've got a lot to do, and you don't really feel like doing it, so you clean the closet, and that feels better. You clean up your pantry, that feels better. It's that relief that the brain goes, "Ah, that makes us feel better." It's the same with a sip of alcohol. Some people will drink alcohol and it doesn't do it for them. Other people take, a little sip of scotch and boy, that's it, or a drug, or they get into video games. It depends on what they're doing. But if it works for relief, that's the teenager.
And all of us have things that we do to try to relieve stress, right?
Absolutely.
But when does it become problematic?
So that's a great question. We will look at coping versus defense mechanisms. Now, coping is when we have a challenge in our life and we have the resources to kind of deal with that challenge so we can meet the challenge. Sometimes that may be drinking, right? You go out and you have a drink at night and that kind of relaxes you and you feel ready to go about the next day, or some people smoke a cigarette and they're just they don't, it's not excessive. But there are times when the challenges we have to meet exceed our coping. And that's where we will go into these defense mechanisms. So, defense mechanisms are automatic, they're unconscious, we're not aware, and we lose control over them. So, it becomes problematic when what we're doing comes to either our attention or someone else's attention that's causing us trouble and we cannot stop.
Okay. So it's disrupting your life and you realize it, or someone others are realizing it, and you can't. You try to change and you can't change, or you.
Right. If you can change, then it's coping. But if you can't change now, what's happened is you've been catapulted what I would call back into that defensive mode, that teenage mindset. And that teenage mindset is not going to give up protecting you unless there's a better way.
Right. Right. So when you're now moving out of your teenage years and now you're an adult, does the adult have certain skills that the teen doesn't have? I mean, how does when you've talked about the adult mindset, how does that come online, and how does that play with the other two mindsets that we develop as we grow?
The adult mindset, it rocks. It is something I'm continually in awe of. And I think it holds not only just a spiritual capacity that can knock your socks off, but it's a lovely way to be. And I think
What is the adult mindset? I mean, what
the adult
characterizes it?
mindset is really the capacity to understand that in my language, the child and the teens dance. The child and teen always dance together, but not and understand and have compassion for it, but not let it run the show. The adult mindset is the ability to not just follow your feelings, but follow your purpose. The adult
That is
mindset.
excellent. Not just the ability to follow your feelings, but follow your purpose.
Mhm.
That is underline that. I'm sorry to interrupt. Go ahead.
No, because the child and teen are about instant gratification of some panic and to get relief. The adult mindset has a tremendous amount of capacity to be uncomfortable a- and be okay being uncomfortable in the service of something greater than oneself or for a bigger purpose.
So the adult can be in uncomfortable and stressful situations and not lose their sense of identity, separateness,
Y-
decision making, cognition, all of that.
That's right.
So when
They
does
don't go
the
into survival mode.
so if the teen mindset starts to develop, say 11, 12, 13, when does the adult mindset come online? Does it, because you've told me that the brain actually develops, the part of the brain that is able to manage life comes online last. Can you talk to that?
Yeah, the adult mindset's the last kid to come online and the first one to go. It's fragile. It is built on top of what's come before, so, it's always there, but it's not hooked up, so you have a lot of variability in this. You have some people who can kind of develop adult mindset skills younger than others, but as a rule, we tend to not look at the adult mindset really coming online until the mid-20s.
The mid-20s. Now, does it is it different for men and women?
Yeah, women seem to be doing that a little earlier. So, some people are pushing this out to 28, even 30, like, they're really pushing it far out for us to really develop the capacity to manage our, you could say hedonistic or our emotional life. We are self-centered, self-focused creatures, and that's not a bad thing. Of course, we're self-focused, we're trying to meet our needs, but for the adult mindset to really come online, it's really that 20s with women a little earlier.
For those of us who are pastors and leaders, our job requires us to live in that adult mindset. And sometimes if we start out in ministry earlier in life, the pressure to enter into that adult mindset can actually, uh, I think, can sometimes. I know for my case, I was 16 when I was felt a call into the ministry. Within 3 months, my older brother was killed, and my father began giving me all the attention he'd been giving to my older brother, and basically began treating me like the not just the older brother, but like the head of the family. I stepped very early into a leadership role in my family system, and I didn't
Very
hadn't fully
quickly.
lived out my teenage years.
Yeah. Yeah.
That became so I knew how to live in the adult mindset, but I wasn't. It wasn't satisfying. There was a part of me that felt undeveloped. I think sometimes for pastors, the pressure to stay in the adult mindset, you almost want to kill the teen and quiet the child mindset, right? So, how does an adult person with an adult mind learn to deal with that teenager? And how do those different mindsets or voices uh, hijack you in your adult life?
Uh, so that example is so vivid because it describes exactly why people get hijacked. So if we are allowed to, let's take the ideal. We have a, a really super supportive network. We can um, get our needs met. We're not in survival mode, and we're moving into adult world with support to become an adult. So you hear this all the time. People help teenagers think critically, logic, with reason, some logical reasoning, to sort of learn how to take other people's different perspectives without losing their own, learning how to uh, talk about difficult topics without, what we call going limbic or going emotional. Uh, so if you are plunged into a need to do the adult mindset and you're smart, that's going to require some IQ resources. And you do that, the adult basically squashes the needs of that child, and the teen allows it until they don't. And I don't know if you're familiar with Indiana Jones in their first movie, but he's gonna do this sword fight with this guy, and he's tired and he doesn't feel like doing it. So he watches the guy go through all this stuff, and then he just takes his gun out and shoots him. That's the teen mindset. The teen mindset will allow you to do your adult stuff until it gets tired and then it just shoots it. It's not a fair fight.
So the teen hijacks, it just like sits in the seat of decision. And that's why
It's like,
I think that's why we see that as pastors working with people.
yep.
You
Yeah,
know,
all of a sudden. Yeah,
they
yeah.
go out and they go on a bender, or
Yeah,
they blow up their marriage, or they
yeah,
just do something we would call crazy.
yeah.
They act like they're. I've seen this in my work, working with couples. They'll turn. A lot of times, I notice it can happen when couples who are married young, and then they move into their late 30s,
Yes.
early 40s, and all of a sudden, the woman or the guy will just start acting like a 16-year-old. I mean, literally, even talking to them, it's like talking to a 16-year-old. They take on the affects, they take on the kind of the whatever. It's like, who are you? And when I sat and worked with you, talked with you, you really helped me to see that's what's going on, is that for some reason they reach a critical point where that teenager is not going to shut up anymore. And they just kind of
That's right.
become that teenager. Is that
That's right, and really, that poor adult doesn't get to vote.
talk about that?
So, you're walking around, and, I have that little nesting dolls, I have it over there, but I don't wanna interrupt the video, but, it looks like you're walking around as a single unitary person, but if you open that up, there's another teenager inside there, and you open the teenager, and there's a little child inside there. Now, what happens is you're walking around minding your own business thinking that you're just one person, and then when the teenager takes over, all you're left with is saying you're sorry when the teenager does their thing, settles the child, then they leave, and your adult comes back, and your adult is going, "Mea culpa. I'm sorry, I'm sorry. Why did I do that?" And that's what makes me sad because people blame themselves. And I'm not saying you can't be held accountable, but by goodness, it is not a decision that people make to blow up their lives. They they are doing this because they've been hijacked or catapulted into this other mindset. They don't even know it's there, and then they blame themselves or they feel bad, and that's a shame. That to me, that's the horrible part of that. And one of the things I love about the work I do is to help people understand, everyone's at fault. Of course, we're at fault. We're the ones doing it, but no one's to blame. And that is that you are honestly a victim of your biology here, and we can do things to help people rebalance that, integrate that, to allow the adult mindset to stay in charge when a trigger happens.
So it's learning how to manage your thinking and these mindsets that exist by developing adult mindset skills. Is that it, or is it negotiating with the other mindsets? I mean, how does that practically look?
Yeah, great. Now that's a pretty complex question, actually, but it depends on the individual. So sometimes if there's not a lot of trauma and the brain's not stuck, then this information can actually change people and they kind of go forward and go, "Oh, it's a negotiation. I want to not go to work today or I want to drink too much, but I'm going to change that and I don't want to do that." And they can wrestle that away. That's great. For many people, knowing better, as Maya Angelou says, knowing better is not does not result in doing better.
Is that what we
And
call
so
addiction?
yes, basically. It is sort of the idea that you are compelled to continue to do something that the part of you doesn't want to do. Think about it. We're adults, we're walking around, it's 2023. Why in the world would we not be able to not do something we don't want to do?
Right.
Think about that for a second. What in the world is going on? I don't want to drink too much. Okay, stop. I want to stop eating as much as I'm eating. I want to lose some weight. Okay. And we can't. What's going on? And that's what's going on is the teenagers in play. And the teenager is often stuck between the child and the teen. The teenager's only eating too much to quiet the child. The teenager's drinking too much to shut the child up.
Explain that.
So when we have vulnerabilities in childhood and they're not met, it's not like they go away. So if we have been abandoned and now we're in a relationship and that person's mad at us and we all of a sudden the brain, the mind, the body, the brain is saying that's potential abandonment. It's there's going to be frantic efforts to keep that relationship. The adult is not going to interrupt that because the teenager is going to keep that relationship to prevent that feeling of abandonment that's destabilizing for us.
Wow.
The brain just simply says, that was catastrophic. It never updated the program. You're 25, you're 35. It's not catastrophic today, but it was when you were 3. But the brain's still running that program. So the teenager says, keep that relationship close. Don't let anyone leave.
So if this is resonating with people that are listening, either in their ministry to others or for themselves, uh, some steps forward, some simple steps to development would be, I would say, I guess, awareness, right? Being aware that you have these different mindsets and voices, and what is speaking to me right now. What mindset is in the driver's seat right now?
Mhm,
Is it,
mhm.
and how can you tell if it's your child, teen, or adult mindset?
A very simple way to that's a big thing, and, a very simple way that to, know that is adults don't lose they don't lose themselves emotionally, okay? So if you're not in your adult mindset, you're in your child and teen dynamic. So the adult is gonna be reasonable, it's not gonna be hysterical, it's not gonna be irrational, it is going to always be the part of you that feels like you can be calm and not that the adult doesn't get mad or emotionally upset. It's just that when it does that, it handles it in a mature way. So if we're yelling and screaming and losing our stuff, we're not in our adult. So that's how the adult is always going to feel, sound, and look like our best self. You know how you feel when you're hungry and not hungry anymore. You know when you're hangry or
Yeah.
you're tired and you're irritable and then you feel wake up and you've had a great sleep and you feel great. That's your adult.
So the adult can feel anger, can even express anger, can feel
Yep.
fear and express fear, but it doesn't overwhelm them or overpower them. They're
Nope.
in control. They
That's right.
So how do you know if you're in your teen mindset?
It's probably where you are most of the time.
Okay.
The child mindset is very damaging. The child mindset is overwhelmed. It is non-functional. They're helpless, powerless in raw emotion, which is
So if
why
you're
you
in a
like
child mindset, you're going to your little kid, you're just like
you're
freaked
yep,
out. You
yep,
collapse.
yep, lying in bed all day, sleeping, or crying, sobbing, shaking. I don't know who I am anymore. What's wrong with me? I can't function. That kind of thing. The teen mindset is valuable because you can see it's always trying to keep you from that level of overwhelm and decompensation.
So when the child mindset's you collapse, you feel emotional, you feel overwhelmed and powerless.
Yep.
How does the teen in that moment describe how the teen mindset now comes online to help and often makes things more difficult?
Good point. Usually, you will not see the child mindset unless the teen mindset collapses. So the teen mindset's not going to let that child mindset show up if they can help it. So if you see the child mindset, it is a collapse of the teenager. Now, what often will happen is the teenager might come back. Right now, what the teenager might come back with vengeance. So, like, I got to get a drink. I'm gonna, drink, 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 or drugs, or just active addiction. Like this is where you see people frantically in that stage of addiction where they're really getting in trouble because the teen is panicking.
Compulsive sexual behaviors.
Yes, yes. It's there's a yep.
So the teen just
So
says, we're gonna just give this to this kid to get this kid quiet,
and the
and
teen's starting to panic. Because the teen's going, this isn't working. So when you sort of see that the addiction has a natural slide down at some point, and so it's in the beginning, it's sort of like working, and you can sort of function. So the teen's like, this is good, right? But as things get worse and worse, the teens now doing the same thing all the time. They don't know what else to do. I mean, if they had something else to do, they'd do it.
so let's talk about how we can, once we become aware of these three mindsets and how they work in our lives. And I think everybody listening or watching is thinking about this and how this may impact them or the people they work with. Uh, what are some solutions without having to go and become a licensed psychotherapist? Or uh, what are some ways that we, as helpers of people, can help ourselves and others when we are now recognizing? Like I can think of times I'm sitting in a counseling session with people in my congregation or people that I'm caring for, and I can see the child manifest every now and then, and they're just powerless and they fall apart. And then you can see the shift, and suddenly they became angry or furious, or they just withdraw. Like somebody takes control, power, there's a power shift that happens,
Yep.
and they're difficult to reach because they're in this, whatever that teen thinking is, they're there. How do we get them? How do you help that person? How do you help yourself when you're in that place?
So this is one of the reasons why people in your profession, I'm sure, and same in mine, because we're all doing very similar work, is there's burnout. Trying to work with the child mindset will suck you into a never-ending hole. There will be no end for a child's need to be rescued and saved. And so people in the helping profession. I think my profession helps us a little more. You guys kind of get stuck out there because you're not necessarily taught this way. But that child mindset is a serious problem when it shows up because it's going to want to latch on for rescue. The teen mindset will might reject your efforts, right? So when you're working with a child or teen mindset, it's exhausting because you don't know how to grasp that adult. So that can lead to burnout for a lot of people. So learning how to work with the child mindset, the child, when I see someone in a child mindset, I immediately go for safety. How can they feel safe? How can they feel supported? And so they can get their arousal lower. And when they do that, there's no child inside an adult. It's a mindset. So they can then go right back into their adult mindset where you then can maybe engage them a little bit. Uh, so you're really wanting to do with the child is get safety. With the teenager, you want to validate. The teenager doesn't want you to give them advice. They want to be validated. They want their feelings to be heard. They want to really feel like someone sees them and gets them. When you do that, that also lowers their arousal and you have access to the adult again. Does that make sense?
Yes, it does. So you comfort the child, you affirm the teen, and hopefully it they get comfortable enough to surrender to the adult mindset. And you,
And once the adult mindset's there, then the ultimate goal, and this is sort of where, I think psychotherapy does a good job, though. The ultimate goal is to help that adult manage their inner child's overwhelm because now they have an adult to do that. Once they were too little, but we really can. That's the integration. The adult can go in and help that child not feel those open wounds from childhood. And that lowers the teenager's need to defend.
so a lot of folks, their teenagers are exhausted
Yes.
because they're trying to manage this child mindset and the pain and this trauma, and they're trying to, you know, they want. How does the teenager feel towards the adult? Is there like a competition there, or a
No, like if you think about the teen mindset as your inner protector, it's, when you put your hand on a hot stove and it sort of naturally takes it off before you even know you've done that. That's what I'm calling it the teenager, but it's really the neural network of inner protection. And so when it's not in survival mode, it's not protecting you. The teen mindset's really what's responsible for our creativity, our joy, our ability to look up and be energetic and enthusiastic about life. It's not the child. The child is like, am I safe? Do I matter? Do you love me? Do I belong? I'm good. That the teen is the one that wants to go out and have fun and look out and see opportunities and go and enjoy life. So what's the teenager doing if it's not having to defend the little child? It's making your life wonderful.
ah,
And it gets along great with the adult. It's just that the adult has to always have the teen in supervision because the teen might say, let's go on a vacation tomorrow. And the adult's like, let's plan that vacation for next month.
yeah, that's great. That's excellent. So it's not about separating and killing off parts of yourself. It's about integrating those parts of yourself from a centered place. And I think that's really, as a teacher of scripture, I think that's what Paul is saying. Paul uses these terms. He talks about children being no longer children. He talks about, you know, uh, uh, being adults, growing up spiritually, becoming mature. And so I can see the language of the Bible, and I look at this not just through the psychological lens you're helping me to have, but also through Scripture, and it's a very powerful tool. We're about out of time today, Dr. Kelly, but I just wanted to ask this one last question. You're talking again to pastors and ministry leaders. They're going to have all kinds of thoughts and feelings after this conversation. What are some simple strategies that these leaders can use to guard their mental health as a pastor in a local church with all the complexity that comes with that?
The one thing I think would be to understand the possible ways that the child, how do they recognize their child's vulnerabilities? Like, where are they afraid to be human, right? Are they what happened to their ability to just be a real person and not just be the person that's idolized? And then that teenager part of them, what does that teenager do to keep those normal needs under wraps, maybe? And how might that be hurting you? Like, so what can the adult maybe do to honor and find ways to get support, to feel human, to be able to be human, in with certain people. Because when you get out there, I feel for pastors, I'm sure it's very similar to so many people who are in leadership roles. You're a wonderful adult, but you have vulnerabilities and you're not perfect. And how do you deal with that? And if your teenager is bashing you, like, "You're not perfect. What's wrong with you? What's wrong with you?" You're at war with yourself. And so you really wanna be on your own side, and that would really mean to understand what's in your child mindset, and what's in how does your teenager work, and not hate them. You can wanna change that, but not hate it. Your teenager is always and will always have your back and wants to just make sure you're okay. It's just that in the profession you're in, you're not allowed to be
Yeah.
vulnerable in ways that you really are.
A great topic for us, even on the podcast to explore in the future.
I love
Ways
that.
we can be fully human and still fulfill the responsibilities that we have as spiritual leaders. Uh,
Absolutely.
Dr. Kelly, if somebody wanted to reach out to you and talk with you, how would they contact you? Maybe they want to, for themselves, do some work on this, or there might be some leaders that want to learn from you and get some resources so they can grow in not only protecting themselves and their families, but the people they serve.
I love to talk and be a resource and be here for people. The best way to reach me would be on my website, Serona Counseling Retreats. To contact me through, it has my email, it has a text. I'm great with texting, and just text in and I'll respond.
Wonderful, and we'll put your contact information in the show notes and some of the resources that you've shared with us, and I think it'll be really helpful. This has been a phenomenal time. Thank you again, Kathy. I appreciate you. I appreciate the work that you do. In my job as a pastor, I was trained to do pastoral counseling and have myself been in counseling for numerous times throughout my life to get help for things that I needed help with. I believe in it. I believe in the power of it. Um, but I will tell you that what I've learned from you in seeking out and having you do some teaching with me has been probably one of the most significant things that have helped me as a pastor in my life help other people by applying these truths and seeing them work in a spiritual context. So thank you so much. Thank you for the work that you do and continue to do. And we pray that God will abundantly bless you. And
I thank you too, and all of the pastors who are listening. Thank you for the work you do. And we're all in this together trying to help other humans. That's what we're here for. Yeah.
that's right. Thank you so much, Dr. Kelly. We'll talk again soon. God bless you.
Thank you. Okay.
Thanks for joining us on the Shepherds Podcast. For more episodes and resources, you can check out our YouTube page or our website at theshepherdsnetwork.com.